I was having breakfast in the bustling restaurant of my hotel in Hong Kong. A typhoon had swept through the city, and the skies were still stormy. Leafing through the South China Morning Post, an opinion piece caught my eye. It said that many Chinese government officials have young mistresses. They are called little thirds, signaling vast differences of age and power. These young lovers are supposedly ticking time bombs, exposing corruption when jilted. I posted a tweet about it, adding the hashtag patriarchy. I remember that moment with stinging pain. Just hours before arriving in Hong Kong for a conference, I had filed for divorce, ending in a day and a half a marriage that had lasted a decade and a half. I remember looking out over the wet foliage of the lush hotel gardens, the rattle of my teacup, the rustle of the newspaper, and most of all, I remember that word as I typed it on my iPhone: patriarchy. I had mistaken the immense betrayal that had unfolded in my life, the little thirds I had not known about, as infidelity. That was not it. It was patriarchy. There was a betrayal of love for sure, but there was also a betrayal of equality. What I had thought was a marriage between equals had turned out to be a relationship of profound inequality, in which male power required the subordination of women, either as dependent little thirds or as wives who were not worthy of fidelity and honesty. Suddenly, that noisy restaurant fell silent. My phone stopped beeping. The world stood still. It had happened to me. Patriarchy had happened to me? Raised by my parents to be strong and strong-willed, finding my way to the US alone at the age of 18, succeeding on my own terms in academia, I was not the sort of woman to whom patriarchy happened. A scholar of gender and poverty, I studied the lives of poor women as they eked out survival amidst exploitation and oppression. My life was different. But it is to me that patriarchy happened. On that stormy morning, it slapped me in the face. After Hong Kong, I went to Kolkata, the city of my birth, and there 2 women, Bula and Kalpana, held my hand and said, "Didi, ei nesha kate na, apni pechone takaben na." Elder sister, this addiction cannot be remedied. Don't look back. But I was not their elder sister. I was the daughter of their employer. In a city awash in poverty, they worked as maids in an assembly line of middle-class homes. One lived with a husband she adored, the other with an alcoholic husband and abusive son. Across the great divide of social class, they held my hand and made me promise never to bargain with patriarchy. I'm here today to share what I'm learning from this experience. And I do so using an old-fashioned word, patriarchy, which implies a social system of male power exercised not only through domination, but also through benevolence and protection, even love. I'm here to argue that we must keep tackling patriarchy if we are to fashion a more equitable world. As Americans, we often think that patriarchy is some other culture's problem. We condemn honor killings in Afghanistan and the rapes of women in Indian cities, and outraged we should be. But such spectacular instances obscure the ways in which patriarchy is present in our lives here, not just their lives elsewhere. We also think that something big and bad has to happen to us for it to be patriarchy. But sometimes patriarchy is a phrase, a name, a stereotype. A few years ago, a New Yorker article about the public education movement in California featured my teaching and activism and described me thus. Are you ready for it? Roy, who is married but childless, mothers her charges like a broody, if pedagogic hen. I was in Kolkata with my mother when the article appeared. I laughed it off, but I remember her shriek. Which century are we in? Who uses the phrase childless to describe a woman anymore? Never having described my identity through the choices of marriage or childbearing, she could not tolerate that description. My favorite poet is the late Adrienne Rich. She writes, "We have no familiar ready-made name for a woman who defines herself by choice, neither in relation to children nor men, who is self-identified, who has chosen herself." But patriarchy also defines the identity of men. It is as much the enforced script of proper masculinity, how to be a real man, as it is that of proper femininity. To choose ourselves, not as wife or little third, not as mother or childless, not as whore or Madonna, not as patriarch or eunuch, we need institutions that enable dignity and equity. This is the lesson I want to share today. With all due respect, Sheryl Sandberg is wrong. To say that women can solve the problem of patriarchy through more self-confidence and well-meaning men can help suggests that this is all about goodwill and willpower of individuals. My feminism is about the rules of the game. The problem that I've been working on for much of my career is whether institutions dismantle or reproduce patriarchy. My institution is the university. I became an academic because producing knowledge and educating the next generation matter to me. But the university, like other institutions, can and does grant men power over women. Let's call this the don't close the door syndrome. Recently, a superbly brilliant student of mine applied to and was admitted to the top graduate programs in the country. Scholarships in hand, she went to visit her first choice, an elite university. She was eager to work with the department's most well-known scholar. As she was about to enter his office, a woman faculty member said, "When you're in there, don't close the door. You're just his type." My student did not have that meeting or join that university. She did not close the door, but a door closed for her. The don't close the door syndrome may not be as overt as fraternity parties or campus rapes, but it defines the terms on which doors open or close to institutions. My story is about the university, but it applies to many other institutions. Unless we are willing to address the problem of patriarchy, doors will continue to close for many brilliant minds. Our workplace, our public sphere, the knowledge we produce will be and has already been severely impoverished by this loss. Now, I can't describe to you a world free of patriarchy. There is no blueprint to get us there, no eureka solution. As a wise friend quipped, there is no anti-patriarchy app we can install on our iPhones. What I can do is describe a process, my experience with how institutions dismantle or reproduce patriarchy, how change is possible, but how difficult and slow that can be. In my first years as a young professor, despite being at a top-ranked university, I was miserable. In my immediate workplace, senior male faculty regularly disparaged women colleagues and demeaned their scholarship, often using sexualized talk. I made trouble, and for that got into trouble. Insubordinate towards senior faculty was what the written warning said. One day, I made a list of the various instances of troubling behavior and circulated it as a memo among my colleagues, noting that this was an environment of harassment and discrimination. I had used words that were taboo. A senior woman faculty mentor gave me this advice: "Ananya, you are such a castrating female. You make men feel so bad about themselves. If you only stopped doing that, you would not be so unhappy at work. Yes, women often play chief of staff to patriarchy. She meant well. She knew the rules of the game and she was sharing them with me. It was the equivalent of the instruction to stand by one's man. Years later, Bula and Kalpana, utterly poor women, were to give me very different instruction. I knew then in that moment that I could either learn the rules of the game or I could demand that the rules be changed. I chose the latter, not to be brave, but because my students were watching, to see whether I would model the status quo. Instead, I modeled insubordination. And so I'm here today to say, don't get out, speak out. Stay in the institution, but do not be enlisted into silence. And I'm here to say, be insubordinate. There's a phrase for this, an idea that has shaped the history of the country of my birth and the country to which I immigrated: civil disobedience. We associate civil disobedience with grand protest movements, but it is quite simply the active and non-violent refusal of rules and norms that are unjust. And so I'm here to say, when the rules create inequality, disobey the rules. Now, for the women among you, in doing so, you may have to embrace a nasty label or two. My first group of women PhD students came to be called the Mean Girls, because they refused to gain success through the protection and patronage of the old boys' networks of academia, the professional equivalent of Little Thirds. They embraced the Mean Girls name, even designing matching velour hoodies with a label, with the title Doctor added in. They kicked up their high heels, wrote spectacular dissertations, landed splendid jobs, and met over a bottle of bourbon once a week. They modeled for me what it means to not only survive in an institution, but thrive in it. And so I'm here to say, think about how alliances of strength emerging from vulnerability transform hostile institutions. There's a gorgeous line by Adrian Rich. There must be those among whom we can sit down and weep and still be counted as warriors. Not my line, the great Adrian Rich. We did make institutional change, but none of us did it alone. That is perhaps the most important thing I have to say today. When I started my career, women faculty had already been fighting gender discrimination for many years. At my university, a small group of women led campaigns to institute family leave policies for men and for women, to ensure that departments hired and promoted women. Yes, there were departments proud to have never granted tenure to a woman. To end leaks in the academic pipeline, women dropping out of the academic workforce. To appoint leaders who would rewrite the rules of academic patriarchy. I could be insubordinate because these women had made it safe for me to speak out. And they in turn relied on a national infrastructure of laws and rights that promoted gender equality, albeit painfully slowly. Those laws and rights were not granted in this country or any other. They were won. And so I'm here today to say we cannot fight these as solo battles. We must do so collectively, as shared histories and shared futures. That history is not linear. Civil rights once won can be reversed. Women's rights once won can be reversed. We're witnessing this here in the US. Equality needs constant vigilance. I'm learning this lesson in my own life. I thought I'd won my battles with patriarchy. They're just starting all over again. I'm here today at the urging of my sister. Why did I, self-declared feminist, scholar of gender and poverty, need to be urged to speak out? Because I was not only heartbroken by betrayal and divorce, but also humiliated. And what am I allowed to do with such humiliation? I can be the angry, hysterical woman who comes to believe that by refusing to stand by her man, she is the castrating, childless female. I can be Teflon Superwoman, the wear your brightest lipstick, cheerful, cheerleading whirlwind of professional busyness, unfazed by the shit show. We've all done that. But those are choices of shame and silence. Patriarchy is emboldened by shame and silence. I'm learning that it's not my shame. It cannot be my silence. Instead, I'm here today to name and shame patriarchy. And I thus insist on using that old-fashioned word. For a scholar and cultural critic, Bell Hooks asks, and how can we organize to challenge and change a system that we cannot name? I'm here today for my nieces and nephew, and for my students. I have to believe that they will create a different world of gender relations, that they will go to university and not worry about closed doors, that they will enter into relationships of love free of ownership and subordination, and that they will inherit institutions that enable dignity and equity. Thank you.